This is the BBC.
This podcast is supported by advertising outside the UK. This is the BBC.
Dear brothers and sisters, all are welcome here at the Confessions podcast, whether saint or sinner.
Hello and welcome. It's another Confessions podcast from your friends at the BBC, specifically the Radio 2 department, where all the sinful members of the public come to tell their tales of deceit, debauchery and deception. Seeking forgiveness from you, the parish of Radio 2, and Joe and Sister Bobby here ready to kick off in a state of moral panic.
Yeah, I can tell you now that this week's batch of confessions includes Neil's story, Can I Stick It? Yes, I can. Monica's tale, A Hard Day's Plight. And Tim's confession, French dissing in the Black Country.
You're good at those.
I love them. Plus, we uncover another classic confession from the crypt, especially requested by you lot.
We start this week's podcast with Archie the Architect's sinful story. I didn't start the ire.
Oh.
Clever, huh?
Uh-huh.
Please be seated.
Dear Joe, Simon and the Ecclesiastical Court of Judgment, my confession takes me back to the early 1990s, a time when I was a fresh-faced, newly qualified architect, burning with enthusiasm and desperate to impress, but lacking that sense of judgment which says, you really shouldn't do this. Definitely not. My tale occurs during a short period of employment with a large architectural practice and involves a fellow architect called Tarquin, obviously. Tarquin was working full-time while studying also part-time to pass his architectural degree. However, he'd also found the time to become engaged to Beryl, the Spurs-supporting daughter of the practice secretary.
Hang on a minute. Tarquin and Beryl, is this real?
Tarquin and Beryl are an item, and Beryl supports Spurs, and Tarquin wants to be an architect.
Okay, just
just
checking.
Doing a flow diagram of this. They'd met when he'd volunteered to escort Beryl to see a match at White Hart Lane, and the rest, they say, was history. Now, architectural training involves a series of projects, designing a house, a swimming pool or sports centre, for example, and at the end of each project, which usually lasts a few weeks, your drawings are pinned on the walls, and the tutors and fellow students pull them apart. How nice and reassuring. This can be more than brutal, with individuals reduced to tears as many weeks of hard work are ripped to shreds and compared to toilet paper. I never knew it was quite so tough, training to be an architect, although it was about 7 years worth of work. Joe and Simon, the incident I need, and Bobby, I just added that in. The incident I need to receive forgiveness for revolves around one of these project reviews. Tarquin was just coming to the end of the last project for his first degree and had been working 24 hours a day for weeks, trying to finish the drawings, reports, and other documents. All his hopes were now pinned on months of priceless work, which was carefully stored in the university studio, ready to be handed in. I cannot emphasize enough the pain, hard work and sacrifice that goes into this submission. Your very soul is etched into the paper. The following morning we were both in the office, and Tarquin received a call from the university. A student review had not gone well the night before, and the student involved had been told his work was so bad he might as well burn it. And this was exactly what he proceeded to do, setting fire to his work in a bin in the centre of the studio, and had managed to burn the studio down, with much of the final year students' work along with it.
Oh my gosh.
Fortunately, it looked as if Tarquin's work was safe, if a little burnt and a little soot damaged. Just to be clear, Tarquin's not involved in that.
No.
It was some other student we're talking about. This news, instead of filling me with sadness, actually gave me an idea, an opportunity for some mischief. And I hatched a plan with our practice secretary, who you'll remember is Tarquin's future mother-in-law, and hiding in a small room called the office, she put the call through to Tarquin, while at the same time ensuring everybody in the office could hear what was going on. Simon, you need your Ray Winston voice at this point, which is fortunate because I saw a movie this morning with Ray Winston in it. So it's going to be fresh.
Who'd have thought? Who'd have thought?
Is this Tarquin? That was it. Come on. I mean, yeah, that was it. Is this Tarquin?
Very good.
And the reply was, yes. Do you study at the University of Greenwich? And were you in the studio last night? After a nervous pause, he came back with another yes. And he said, but I wasn't there all night. I was with my fiancée. Really, sir, can she Could you collaborate this story? Can anyone else confirm where you were? Yes, they can, says Tarquin. We were at the family planning clinic. Oh. We were sorting out contraception. I can give you full details of what we chose if you like. This statement was broadcast throughout the office for all to hear and was met with what can only be described as a face of thunder by his soon-to-be mother-in-law. I promptly informed Tarquin that I didn't need to know any further details, thank you very much, at this stage, but said he should not leave the country because we might need to talk to him again. And now, here we go, because, says Archie the architect, I can only apologise for the hernias and burst blood vessels experienced by the staff as they all tried not to laugh as Tarquin bounded through the office, informing us all that the police had told him not to leave the country and may need to speak to him again about the fire. And it was not for some time that he realised that the policeman was, in fact, me, Archie the architect, and in the meantime had wondered why his future mother-in-law was even more mother-in-law-ish than usual. So, Joe and Simon and Bobby, I need forgiveness not from the future mother-in-law, who should by now understand where grandchildren come from, nor from Beryl, who as a Spurs supporter deserves all the embarrassment.
Oi.
Hey, steady on. Now I need forgiveness from Tarquin, firstly for making life with his future mother-in-law even harder, and two, for exposing his detailed social life to the entire office. I sincerely hope Tarquin qualified as an architect and that he and Beryl lived happily ever after. I think we might have changed Beryl's name, but we certainly didn't change Tarquin, because I think Archie changed that for us anyway. So there was a little surprise and twist there in the end. I didn't see that coming. I'm going to be quite tough on Archie just for his anti-Spurs diatribe. Anyway, what do you say, Joe?
I say that was a priceless kind of Ray Winston impression. Well done, sir. Just like to compliment you on that. This is a simple prank gone wrong with an unfortunate revelation, and really Tarquin just shouldn't have been so gullible and so silly as to make the revelation, to confess all. Should have lied. So yeah, you're forgiven.
Or you shut your face.
Is that me?
No, I'm just getting more into the game.
No problem. Really funny prank. Tarquin should just never have been so dumb.
Bobby Pryor.
I disagree, Archie, because this is where you don't think ahead. I mean, you're not 6 anymore. I mean, I say I love a trick, but I don't blame Tarquin for spilling the beans. You're on the phone to the police, and it's one of those things, you can't even sit in a car and have a police car drive by without feeling guilty for something. So I understand why you spilt the beans, because of course it just adds kind of credence to where you were, that you could answer him and say, look, I genuinely wasn't in the fire. So I don't blame Tarquin at all. I think Archie, you took it one step too far. He was already stressed anyway for his exams. He didn't need this. So you're unforgiven,
That
Archie.
sounds pretty merciless as well, doesn't it? If you've worked on that project and then everyone just enjoys ripping it apart. That sounds tough. Anyway.
Oh, well.
Hey, ho-hum. So, forgive and forget.
The Confessions Podcast.
Father Simon, the tale of this story is from 1989, when I was 13 years old. My brother was 14. Regularly, people would say to my parents how my brother and I must get on so well because we were so close in age. But this was not the case. We had similar interests, mainly based around sport, but this would prove to be the catalyst for many an argument. Being the younger brother, I never liked to think I couldn't compete or beat my brother at anything, whilst on the other hand, my brother would never let me win at anything. This meant that anything from Monopoly to 10-pin bowling to academic grades were always hotly contested between the two of us. Depending where you are in the sibling pecking order, people will be shaping up for their reply to this one. One such pastime was the game of Subutio. For your listeners who aren't familiar with this game, Subutio was a tabletop football game described by Wikipedia as a physical simulation of association football involving dexterity and skill in flicking the players' figures, which stand on weighted bases across the tabletop pitch towards the ball. So Subutio has hundreds of team kits and accessories, and my brother and I spent hours creating leagues and cups to simulate the real-life football we both enjoyed. Culmination in the summer of '89, after 6 weeks of school holidays, so like round about early September, was the cup final of our Subutio tournament. The tension and rivalry between my brother and I was on a knife edge. The game was fraught with arguments, shouts and screams, both of us fearful of being the loser. With extra time being played, I scored with the last kick of the game, and I turned to celebrate, running out of our playroom. Now, at the top of the first 3 stairs, before a quarter turn, there stood an antique vase in the corner. That's the direction we're heading. It was about 2 foot in height, with 2 large handles on either side, similar in some ways to the trophy awarded for the Champions League. And up until that point, I had never seen... excuse me. I'd never seen this... I'm coming over all Bono here. I had never seen this vase move in my lifetime. It had been passed down through the family. My mother had reminded us on many occasions how priceless it was. In my excitement, I reached for the vase, turned to face my brother, and raised it aloft above my head in celebration. At this point, you'll be surprised to learn, to my horror, and to my brother's disbelief, one of the handles of the vase came off in my hand. To say my life flashed before my eyes is not an understatement. Although my mother wasn't a tyrant, she ran a tight ship and had dished out some fierce tellings off over the years. It was at this point I knew that there was no way I could admit to breaking this precious family heirloom. I looked to my older brother for guidance, hoping that maybe once in his lifetime he could help his little brother out. His initial reaction was one of total exoneration of himself for any part in what had just happened. However, he soon came to realise that our mother always tended to blame us together, as a collective, so he knew he was in it as well. We placed the vase on the kitchen worktop and set about finding some glue to stick the handle back on. Mum was due home from work within half an hour, so time was against us. We searched everywhere, and the only thing we found was Pritt stick. Which is not perfect for ceramic correction. We both knew this wasn't ideal, but it was our only hope of avoiding inevitable punishment. We glued the handle back on, and by placing it back in its original position on the stairs, with the handle being supported on one side by the wall, it remained attached to the vase. My brother and I stood there in silence, waiting for the handle to fall off. In our amazement, it stayed attached. We knew it wouldn't be long until Mum came home, so we both retreated to our respective bedrooms, waiting for her to return and to discover our monumental mishap. To our relief, the handle remained attached, and the evening passed without incident. For the next few weeks, my brother and I were waiting for the expected discovery, but it never materialised. A month went by, nothing. 2 months, nothing. Slowly the broken handle drifted from my thoughts until approximately 6 months later, when I came home to see the vase had been placed on the kitchen drainer with the handle placed on the worktop next to it. My heart sank and I ran upstairs to the sanctuary of my bedroom. After about 10 minutes we heard Mum call for my brother and I to come downstairs as she wanted a word. We'd done this walk many times over the years to face the music for some misdemeanour or other, but we knew this one was going to be up a few levels. Mum turned to us and said, "Boys, I've got some bad news. Brenda won't be coming to clean the house anymore."
Oh, no.
She has broken my antique vase and has tried to glue the handle back on without telling me. Now, Brenda had been our cleaner for about 4 years and as far as I knew had always done a good job. But in usual teenage conversation we didn't say much, nodded and walked off back to our bedrooms in silence. Both of us knew we'd just been given a get-out-of-jail-free card of epic proportions. The look on Bobby's face is not good, by the way. And so that was it, says Neil. As the years passed, I would occasionally pass Brenda in the street and say hello. My mother never mentioned the vase again, and I'm not sure what happened to it. My intention was always to confess on my wedding day as part of my groom's speech and apologise to my mother. It just so happens I only got married last year. Sadly, Mum passed away 4 years ago, and I saw Brenda at the funeral. She came up to me and asked if I remembered who she was. I said yes, and we had a little chat. She seemed well. Father Simon, I won't ask forgiveness from my mother from beyond the grave, but I would like to ask forgiveness from Brenda, a hard-working lady who should not have been sacked as a result of a teenage boy who is devoid of any sense of responsibility for his actions. My guilt lasted briefly at the time, but as I've matured, my burden of guilt has grown, and I hope your congregation can find it in their hearts to forgive. Are you kidding? Are you kidding, Neil? Do you really think you stand a cat in hell's chance? I don't think so, but we need to ask Jo what she pronounces here.
I hope with all my heart that Brenda is listening to Radio 2 right now, don't you?
Yeah.
And I would give anything in the world to find out the response and what she feels. Maybe she'd like to text in on 88291 and let us know, Brenda,
Yes.
if you are listening out there.
I'm sure you're entitled to lost earnings or something.
Yeah, there must be some kind of recompense. I've got a similar vase which I have never, ever, ever found out. It wasn't a family heirloom, but it was a wedding present that was given to us. And I've never found out who broke it. It was just, I found it like stashed away in little tiny shards. And I have grilled all of my children.
Disco
Anyone who's
Steve
come
did
into
it.
the house. Do you reckon it was?
It was him.
No one will admit it. And before I die, I would really like to find out who broke it. So I'm going to forgive, because that mortal terror of being a child and knowing you've done something absolutely dreadful, with obviously a mother who has been quite stern, I can understand that fear. So I'm forgiven.
Bobby.
Well, despite the face that I was showing you, I'm just heartbroken. I'm heartbroken for Brenda, and I'm heartbroken for you two teenage boys. The problem is actually your mum, because the thing is I understand your mum's pain, but how sad for Brenda. She didn't do it on purpose either. That must have been just an awful moment for Brenda, and she denied it, and your mum didn't believe her. I agree. You should have owned up. But I think it's also terrifying if your mum's not a tyrant but running a tight ship. Self-preservation prevails. So actually, I can find it in myself to forgive. I feel
Double
so
forgiveness.
sorry for Brenda.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Neil's confession. Can I stick it? Yes, I can. Which caused a bit of a stir on the people's verdict, including this unexpected response.
I'm Neil's manager. I love this confession, but as he sits opposite me all day, every day, and is genuinely a good guy. Here you go, we've got a character reference here. I forgive, says Lynn in Swansea. Plus, he's a new dad and is struggling at the moment without sleep.
So mitigating
Emotional
circumstances.
pressure there.
It's almost like he was in court, and there's someone who comes in and says, "Yeah, but give him some."
Give him a second chance.
Yeah.
I think so. It was always nice to hear from colleagues, friends, and relatives of our confessors, and all are welcome at any time.
Gives that human touch, I
It
think.
does.
Right, still to come on this week's podcast, find out what the blazes is going on in this rock and roll confession.
He then threw the briefcase into the crowd like a bride with a bouquet, and the girls went completely crazy. An almighty scrum developed. But before we hear that confession, it's time to head over to the parish notice board to find out what you, the distinguished confessional parish, have been gossiping about. Bobby, what have you got there?
Well, we've got one of our occasional mini confessions,
Oh, good.
which
Yes.
came in on email from Katrin, and she's aged just 9. And it says, "Dear Simon and the team of Forgiveness, a while back my dad downloaded some confessions podcasts to listen to. They were really funny, so Dad subscribed himself and me to the podcast.
Hooray.
Now we listen to them in the car and have a good old laugh. My own confession begins one evening when Mum, Dad and I were having a nice meal at our local Pizza Hut, where I ordered a very tasty cheese and ham pizza. A few minutes later, the puddings arrived. I'd ordered an orange lolly. Mum got a Malteser cheesecake, while Dad got another pudding. I don't know which, because I wasn't really paying attention. But before Mum could eat hers, I scoffed it down, as well as my own lolly.
Good work.
So I seek forgiveness from my mum for having to watch me gobble down the whole cheesecake. I already had more than enough, and Mum deserved the cheesecake because she is a brilliant person. Katrin, age 9.
Hang on a minute. Did Katrin write that? Did she? Or was it Mum, really? Did Mum dictate that? do we
Interesting
think?
point.
Well, the thing is, I think sometimes if someone eats your pudding, it could save you. It's much more helpful.
Yeah.
So I'm going to forgive.
Yeah, because when you're 9, you can eat anything. I mean, you can just have 6 puddings, but maybe Katrin's mum, maybe she shouldn't have. I don't know. So maybe Katrin was doing it for all the right reasons.
It's just that line, Mum deserved the cheesecake because she is a brilliant person.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Or Katrin's been paid a lot of pocket money to say that.
All right. Anyway, Katrin, thank you very much indeed. It's confessions@bbc.co.uk.
So I've got an email now from all the way down under, and it's from Katie Dowling, who says, "Good morning from Australia." No accent. I grew up in Shropshire,
Oh,
thankfully,
come on.
because she grew up in Shropshire.
Okay, fair enough.
And have fond memories of listening to confessions with my mum in the car. And since moving to sunny Perth 4 years ago, I've introduced my boyfriend to the show by downloading a big chunk of episodes. So when we were doing a 12-hour road trip to our holiday destination of Coral Bay in the north of Western Australia, I did the same. And we started discussing one that we remember some details of. All we seem to remember is that it involved a busload of people going on a trip to the south coast and picking up a passed-out drunk person in the local pub. We remember listening to it and howling away in the car, making a rather long and dull journey extremely funny. Hoping these small details are enough for you to find it, as we'd love to be the confession from the crypt one week. Thanks for the laughs. Kind regards, Katie.
Katie, thank you. Well, I do remember that story. It is a classic, and if we can find it, we'll play it for you on a future podcast. Today's confession from the crypt is coming up a bit later, and it's got loads of prog rock in it, which will be a treat, obviously. All you have to do is send us an email with as much information as Katie's just done about the confession, including the year and the month if you can, that you heard it, send it to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
OK, we like this bit. It's the naughty part of the notice board. You lot like it as well. The non-compliant confessions that didn't make it onto the radio for a number of obvious reasons. These are confessions from shameless people who clearly have no moral compass or any idea what exactly is suitable for tea time listening.
OK, well, that includes you, Jackie in Staffordshire, for your tale about your dog doing its business on your sister's precious red carpet, which you dealt with simply by lifting the mess and putting it straight down the loo. You then only gave the carpet a cursory wipe, while blaming the smell coming from the bedroom on your own upset stomach, rather than admitting your dog had pooed in the house. I can understand why that wasn't passed, because you don't want that amount of poo at sort of 20 to 6.
No.
Okay.
Big Tony, your confession of how accidentally leaving a baby monitor in your holiday villa's garden one night sounds harmless enough, until we found out that when it was making that sound, which sounded like a baby crying, it actually was not. It was, shall we say, the making of a baby
No.
in the first place that ended up blaring out across the hotel complex for everyone to listen to. That's not what it's there for. And this week's worst offender is Nancy, who, using a shop mannequin and a helpful dollop of ketchup, faked a dead body to trick your speeding postman into thinking he'd killed someone with his bike.
That's evil. That's bad.
I read that. I thought that was okay. I thought that was...
It's a lot of effort, isn't it?
It's a lot of effort, but it's a little bit nasty, because you can imagine for those few moments, speeding postman, who was obviously very annoying, but would have, he could have been seriously upset about that.
Funny.
Anyway, Nancy, thank you very much indeed. Although these are very funny, we don't think, obviously, they're fit for a radio broadcast. But if you got something, send it to us, confessions@bbc.co.uk.
So we'll go back now to the confessions that did make the cut this week. And here is Tim's story, French dissing in the Black Country.
The Confessions Podcast.
This one comes from Tim. Thank you, Tim. Simon and the Dubious Judiciary. I beg forgiveness for the following event. The year's 1975. The setting, a grammar school near Walsall in the West Midlands. I had just passed all my O-levels and I had to choose 3 subjects along with compulsory general studies to pursue at A-level. My first 2 choices were easy. Geography was a cert. Part of the course involved a week away for a field trip during term time to Swansea University. Also, I'd heard that the course usually attracted more girls than boys, so a big tick for geography. Second, economics. We hadn't studied this at O-level, but to be honest, I really didn't know what it was. It sounded cool, though, and Mr. Jackson was the teacher. He let us call him by his first name, Phil, and he liked Black Sabbath and Led Zeppelin, so that decided it for me. Second tick, economics. Count me in. This is the way people choose their topics.
Phil Jackson sounds like a good guy.
That's the one. However, my third choice was more difficult, and to cut a long story short, it came down to choosing a language. As I'd done better at French O-level than German, it was decided it was to be French. I hadn't bothered to ask anyone what the course entailed. What else could there be apart from learning a few more French words to add to the ones that we'd already been taught? Choices made, I enjoyed the long summer break and rejoined the school in the lower 6th in September. My new economics class was great, and I excelled, later going on to study it at university. The field trip to Swansea was fun, and the girls easily outnumbered the boys in class, so I was again more than happy with my choice of geography. However, my choice of French was not so fulfilling. I turned down English because I wasn't a fan of reading out loud. So imagine my horror on the first day of A-level French when I was presented with a copy of a book called Le Cid, written by a bloke called Pierre Corneille. This is a 5-act French tragicomedy, first performed in 1632, and I was asked to read out the first 2 pages. And he'd written it in French, obviously. Every line had 12 syllables and apparently rhymed, although the way I read it, it certainly didn't. I'd quickly learnt that our teacher, let's call her Madame de Sade, didn't like me, and the feeling was mutual. She was married to an English guy, and this was her first job in England. She had no sense of humour, and unlike Phil, Groovy Phil, our economics teacher, she had never heard of Sabbath or Led Zepp, and had absolutely no grasp of the Black Country dialect. I mean, imagine, fancy that and confusing that with any other accent. I'm sure she enjoyed watching me struggle. Needless to say, I hated my French lessons and did my best to skive off whenever I could. Fake illness, fictitious dental appointments, 3 or 4 granddad funerals, you know, the sort of thing. However, my absences were easily noticed, so I embarked on a more subtle form of disruptive and distracted behaviour instead, which culminated in my coup de grace. Some of our French lessons were held in what was called the sixth form block. This was a 3-roomed porter cabin, each with its own stereo, with one entry via the middle room. The rooms either end were kitted out with comfy chairs, ideal for smaller informal groups like ours. Crucially, the fuse box for the whole block was in the middle room, and this is where my plan for revenge on Madame de Sade was hatched. None of my fellow pupils admitted bringing it to school, but one of the records we played was Frank Ifield's classic, so it's instantly dated, okay? Frank Ifield's classic, She Taught Me to Yodel. I can't remember the verses, but the chorus consisted of Frank singing, She taught me to yodel, yodel-a-dee. Or, if you want the original...
She taught me to yodel, yodel-a-dee.
That's it. Father Simon, this is a classic of its time. So with the help of my mate Ken, I prepared the disruption for the day. About 5 minutes before anyone had turned up for the lesson, I played the record on the stereo, full blast with maximum bass.
She taught me to yodel, yodel-a-dee.
Just like that. And just as Frank came to sing the chorus, I shouted to Ken, who was in the next room, and he cut the power to the whole block. Then, with the stylus still on the record, I hid the stereo behind a pile of cushions, leaving the speakers visible on the shelf. The lesson began, and as expected, Madame de Sade picked on me first, asking another pointless and pretentious question, like whether I felt Les Mains Sales by Jean-Paul Sartre was an anti-communist piece or merely another manifestation of his existentialism. Very proud to have read out that sentence on Radio 2. I began to give an unusually confident reply in my yam-yam French when Ken, in the next room, as planned, put the electricity back on. Unseen by all, the turntable sprang to life and my reply was interrupted by a very loud Australian voice going... As agreed, Ken cut the power immediately, and the room returned to silence, and I carried on with my appraisal of Jean-Paul Sartre as if nothing had happened. Well, the look on Madame de Sade's face was something I will never forget. She went pale and uttered words in French that I have to say were not on the syllabus. She had no idea where the yodelling was coming from. As agreed, Ken switched the power on and off twice more to let Frank boom out again.
Oh, no.
Rockin' Frank. Madame de Sade was now clearly losing it completely, and eventually the lesson was curtailed as she retired to the staff room for a croissant and a gauloise or 6. A different time. That's what they did back in the 60s. I do not ask forgiveness from Madame de Sade. However, I do apologise to my classmates Andrea, Debbie and Janice for disrupting their studies. Amazingly, we all passed our A-level French, but I still haven't got a clue what existentialism is all about, and frankly, I'm not that bothered, to be perfectly honest. Anyway, this is Tim's confession.
Bobby, you go first on this one. I want to take your lead with this because...
But it's tricky because it is hilarious. I do find it incredibly funny, but also I always feel really sad for those teachers. Look, school is a time when all those people want to teach you stuff. It's a rare time. And the thing is, of course, you're always too young to appreciate what's on offer for you. So while it's hilarious, I think I am not going to forgive you for disrupting everybody else's lessons, even if you didn't like Madame de Sade. You didn't put the effort in. Maybe it would have been better if you'd have done some work.
Yeah, maybe you shouldn't have chosen that subject in the first place and actually thought about what subject you were going to do. Maybe that's the answer. I just feel sorry for Madame de Sade.
Me too.
Yeah.
Well, but what if she was a rubbish teacher and she was picking on Tim?
Well, we'll never know because we weren't there.
Yeah, and it didn't turn up. So she knew he wasn't interested, and that's just wasting her time.
But good yodeling. I very much
definitely.
enjoyed the yodeling. Thank you.
Taught me to yodel.
But maybe we've had enough.
You can never have too
Make
much
it stop.
yodeling. Okay.
Make it stop.
All right, there you go.
The Confessions Podcast.
Let's do some a confession. This one comes from Monica. It's quite rock and roll, actually. Most Very Reverend Father Simon and the Sisters of Mercy. Oh, that's quite good.
Yay, I love that.
I come to you to seek your forgiveness, not for my sins, but for those of my father, who has long since passed. You'll be relieved to know it isn't about the time when he pretended to be an undertaker. Why would anyone do that? It's not about the time he assumed the role of the wine waiter in a spaghetti opera for the evening, or for the many other pranks that he conducted, but this, the story for which forgiveness is most needed, goes like this. I need to picture the scene here. It's the swinging 60s, Bobby. Remember?
Okay, yes.
Which, according to Wikipedia, was, quote, a youth-driven cultural revolution that took place in the UK during the mid to late 60s, emphasising modernity and fun-loving hedonism, with swinging London at its centre. That was the swinging 60s. This vision of the swinging 60s may have been true for most people in their mid-20s, but not so much for my parents. In 1964, they're newly married and living in their first flat off the Gloucester Road in London at Emperor's Gate. My dad was working extremely hard as a trainee solicitor and was carefully acquiring his unique young fuddy-duddy style. They enjoyed a quiet existence in the block of flats and were on nodding terms with all of their neighbours, including an interesting couple called John and Cynthia. That John and Cynthia.
That's John and Cynthia, really?
It was around this time that Beatlemania was starting to take off, and the aforementioned neighbours, John and Cynthia, were in fact John and Cynthia Lennon.
Wow.
One of our most famous men in music just happened to be my parents' next-door neighbour. I mean, can you imagine? Turns out what this actually meant was that hordes of excitable, screaming girls would hang around outside the block of flats day and night on the off chance that they may be able to see or even get the autograph of their hero, John Lennon. This would be amazing. I mean, in retrospect, this sounds like the coolest thing ever.
It does.
But probably at the time might have been annoying if you're a young fuddy-duddy person. After a while, this became very wearing for the residents of the flats, and particularly so one Sunday evening when my dad had a lot of work to prepare for the next day. John Lennon had recently returned from... I've just had that
It's
in.
not many times that you say that in a confession,
No,
right?
he doesn't turn up in this. But the Beatles don't turn up very often in this. John had recently returned from a tour, and the girls outside were especially excitable. Dad decided action was needed. So, determinedly, he put on his pinstripes, he picked up an old and beaten-up attaché case, went downstairs to see the crowd. Dad then held up his hand authoritatively, to signal for quiet, and he gave the following announcement. Hello, youngsters. I am John Lennon's representative. John has recently returned home from the latest Beatles tour, and he's very tired. He wants to thank you for your kind attention, but has politely requested that you go away. Maybe you could go home and let him rest. As a small token of his appreciation, he wondered if one of you would like to have his attaché case as a small memento. As you would. He then threw the briefcase into the crowd, like a bride with a bouquet, and the girls went completely crazy. It was as though John himself was amongst them, handing out his precious belongings. An almighty scrum developed, something like those inter-village football games that they used to have a few hundred years ago. First one fan had the bag, then it was ripped out of their hands, then another one had it, then another one, pushing, shoving, screaming, scratching. I love John more than you! No, you don't, I love him more. Ha, you prefer the shadows. Well, no greater offence. This was the cue for more fisticuffs. How can you say that? Hank is better than George. Anyway, and so it went on. A little slice of the 60s. Eventually, a tough-looking girl in a raincoat was the winner, running off with a case tucked under her gabardine mac. She looked like she was guarding it as though it was the Holy Grail. Once the game was well and truly up, everyone dispersed. However, here's the thing, Father Simon. I would like to ask forgiveness, retrospectively on behalf of my dad, from the fan in the Mac who won the case. She will have gone through her entire life treasuring it, thinking that it belonged to John Lennon, one of the most famous musicians of all time. My mum thought it was a mean trick to play and still does. How truly sorry Dad ever was for his mischief, though, is highly debatable. Does this impact on your capacity to forgive? Says Monica. Because actually, it's not John Lennon's attaché case, it's my dad's. And he's not particularly famous for anything, apart from being a great dad. Anyway, well, I liked it because it was a rock and roll swinging 60s confession. You don't get
Very
many
good.
swinging 60s confessions that actually involve real Beatles. Joe.
Your dad sounds like a great dad and also a legend. I mean, I had
He
images
does.
of Reggie Perrin at one point there in his pinstripe suit. I think completely and utterly forgiven because this is A, very funny, B, that girl in the gabardine Mac will have been so happy for her entire life to think she had John Lennon's attaché case. And I hope that she hasn't heard this, and I hope she hasn't had it revealed to her. And I think I just think he should be forgiven, because I think it's completely understandable that the annoying teenagers should be made to go away. So
she might be listening.
Yeah.
Tough woman in the Gabardine Max, she might be thinking, hang on, that's mine. Bobby.
There is that.
Well, the thing is, I appreciate it must be very, very difficult living in a situation like that. So I do forgive him for going out and pretending to be the representative of John. But actually, I can't forgive you for the case, because that was one step too far. I think he got a great sense of humour, but she has been misled her entire life. And it might be for sale now, on an auction site that we know. And it is not the real thing. And of course, people won't know. She might think it is, and she might be now devastated. Yeah, I think so. So he's not forgiven entirely.
The Confessions Podcast.
That was Monica's Confession, A Hard Day's Plight, and that's almost it from this week's batch of confessions. If you want to send in your own dodgy secret, confessions at bbc.co.uk. Don't go anywhere just yet. It's time now for our weekly trawl through the archives to dig out a confession from the crypt.
And this week's has been requested by Sharon, who writes... Dear Simon, Joe and Bobby, I've been meaning to write to you for quite some time now to thank you for your great podcasts. They always brighten up my week. The reason for writing really concerns the episode that you aired on the 15th of May, 2015. The confession I'm referring to featured an incident in a factory with an intercom, a cassette tape player, and Marillion's first album, Script for the Jester's Tear.
God bless him.
The confessor was doing some weekend work and the album blasted through the factory floors at a loud volume. But he didn't realise this until someone complained. You featured snippets of various tracks off the album, and I liked it so much. I checked out the album and was blown away. I've since purchased all their albums, the Fish and Steve Hogarth eras, and I recently have started listening to Fish's solo work, which is also rather fantastic. I've been on a sublime musical journey, and I hope it's not going to end anytime soon. So thank you, simply. I wouldn't have done it without you. Many thanks, Sharon Wade.
So that's interesting. Who would have thought? Because I was just thinking, well, this is going to be an entertaining confession and we'll shove lots of Marillion into it. And it turns out that Sharon has now found the band who she loves more than anything else. So, Sharon, we found the confession, particularly because you remembered the precise day, 15th of May 2015, and here it is.
The Confessions Podcast.
This is tonight's confession, which is from, let me just check, it's from Dave. Thanks, Dave. Dear Father Simon and the all-forgiving, music-loving collective. My confession goes back to the heady days of 1988. I was a builder working in Cheltenham one weekend, and the weekend bit is important. Phase 1 of the contract began on the Monday, so this particular piece of work had to be done on the Saturday and the Sunday. I should explain we were working in a very large factory. It was almost square with windows running down one side. We'd been given permission to work alone, and we gained entry to the factory from the maintenance foreman, who promptly left as soon as we arrived. He said, "Go out via any fire exit and slam it shut behind you when you leave." I don't know if he spoke like that, because in Cheltenham it's unlikely. But anyway, it's my maintenance foreman voice. Yeah. Okay, that's all I can do. Our task was to build a partition wall across the factory, and we were over half finished, which was good news for a Sunday. Anyway, as this was nearly 30 years ago, all we had to listen to was my radio. Well, it was a rather large, state-of-the-art, for the time, 4-speaker subwoofer with graphic equaliser and twin tape deck. How about that? No messing with this. Record from tape to tape, even though you shouldn't. However, with all, home taping is killing music, kids, remember that. However, with all these gadgets, it did drain batteries rather fast. We were working further and further away from the power source, so a plan fell into place. During the week, various announcements had been made via the PA system in reception. I knew the layout, as we had to sign in during the week, so with my ghetto blaster, I headed off to reception. After carefully moving doilies and potted plants, I was able to carefully place my stereo on the button that activated the sound through the PA. I rewound my favourite Marillion album, A Script for a Jester's Tear, their debut album released in 1983, as I think any fool know, right to the very start, and with a little excitement, pressed play. Well, Simon, the whole factory filled with the sweet sound of neo-prog music. A little bit like this. This is a little bit of A Script for the Jester's Tear. Track 1 from the album. It's filling the factory at full volume. Don't you love this? Be very careful, that's all I'd say. Be very careful. Anyway, I headed back to my mate, feeling rather proud of myself, because the work carried on as we enjoyed stellar track after stellar track like this. He knows you know. Yeah, the factory was rocking. Anyway, that track finished, and then such a delight with Garden Party coming next.
Oh God, not again!
Yeah. Anyway, just when you thought you couldn't have any more fun, we lasted right the way through to the last note of the last track, which is Forgotten Sons. Anyway, Father Simon, it had been 47 minutes of glorious pomp turned up to 11. We wanted more, and I raced back to reception, rewound the tape and hit the play button to hear the album all over again through the PA. Here it goes. Anyway, then something caught my eye. On the very far side of the factory, through the windows, I could see a man. A very angry man, frantically waving his arms. I guessed he was trying to attract my attention. I could see now that he'd been banging on the windows and was rather red-faced after a lot of shouting. Fish had got to Forgotten Sons. As the man outside gestured towards the fire exit of Factory 1, as I opened the door, the man shouted, "Would you turn that racket off?" Another local.
Cheltenham.
He was another local.
Yeah.
"What's the problem?" I said, slightly annoyed and affronted. He said that he was the supervising manager. He was doing the Sunday shift in Factories 2 and 3. He'd been banging on the windows for an entire shift, what felt like an eternity. The album had played through twice. He'd been trying to get my attention because the PA system also went through to the other factories. Just then the tape finished and silence fell on all the factories. It turned out they didn't have a volume control in Factories 2 or 3, and they'd had Marillion turned up to 11 non-stop, a whole album's worth. Having given up on getting our attention, he'd walked away angrily during the rewinding process, as all had fallen silent, but then, no, they had to endure the whole album again. And again. Anyway, as it turned out, there were no Marillion fans in Factories 2 and 3. In fact, quite the opposite. They wanted their normal selection of easy listening hits. Carpenters, Commodores, Max Bygraves, not some prog nonsense fronted by a strapping man called Derek William Dick going by the name of Fish. Anyway, I offered my apologies. Or a different choice of music, but he was having none of it. "Finish your job and don't come back," were his very words. So, Father Simon, I don't seek forgiveness from the supervisor or the 20 or so people on their Sunday shift who, quite frankly, should have enjoyed the music, but from my boss, who never got the remainder of the contract, and to this day doesn't know why. So this is probably the only time Marillion has led to some people being unemployed. I don't know. I mean, Fish left around about this time. Anyway, Dave would like some forgiveness for basically blasting Marillion 3 times on a Sunday to an audience of people who, frankly, would have Max Bygraves if they could choose. What do you think, Sister Rebecca?
I remember the massive stereo, the subwoofer thing with all the speakers. I just loved those things. I think that I'm very sad that they no longer, are everywhere. I was going to say he didn't know that Factories 2 and 3 were having to listen to this.
He didn't. No.
He wasn't at fault in that sense because it was unintentional. But then when you said the boss didn't get the contract renewed or continued, that's pretty serious, isn't it? So I'm a bit torn about this one. But I think because he was entirely innocent in what he was doing, as far as he knew, it was just him and his mate listening to Marillion. I'm going to forgive.
I'd like to make it very clear, Marillion are a great band. Anyway, yes, Sister Bobby from the Priory.
Well, I'm on similar ground. And also, why didn't the complaining man in Factories 2 and 3 go to reception and just change the cassette from his car?
I don't think there was anyone there. Maybe they couldn't get in.
Okay, maybe. He could have done a million different things, and it seemed to be really over the top to make him leave. I mean, the other thing I was worried about, and I don't know if anyone picked this up, they had to finish that job by Monday. On Sunday, they were only halfway through the wall. So
I wouldn't get too involved.
I'm just pointing out that actually maybe Marillion stopped working.
Yeah. Well done.
Very good. Now Matthew goes.
Forgiven.
Yes. Do you remember dancing in stilettos in the snow? No, Mr. Fish, I don't.
You remember the lyrics rather well, can I just say?
Yes. I would say that, I don't think the contract was cancelled because of the music. I think there was something else going on. And for that reason, something else was going on. Because I don't see how you can't cancel a contract just because you don't like Marillion, which of course is a great band. Just head off those emails right now. So I am definitely going to forgive.
OK, so it's the people's verdict. Please do you forgive Dave for inflicting Marillion thrice, the same album 3 times, on a Sunday when you'd rather have Max Bygraves?
The Confessions Podcast.
So that was the confession from the crypt as requested by Sharon Wade, featuring Bobby and Rebecca and brother Matt. And how nice. I know you always loved Marillion. And you've always been associated with their work through the Hogarth and Fish eras.
Me and prog rock go hand in hand. There is nothing I love more than a bit of prog rock.
And nice to hear cassette tape mentioned.
Those were the days,
weren't they? There are still some that I can't bear to throw away. Has anybody else got cassettes?
I've got boxes and boxes of my own, and I've just inherited boxes of my dad's ones that I'm going to go through.
And what would they be containing? What kind of things?
Well, there's lots of Rolling Stones, lots of Susie Quattro, little bits of me in the olden days. But the thing is, I don't have a cassette player, so I wanted to buy one of those radiograms with one of those in because they have a really good sound. So there you go. Thing for the future.
I got a cassette of Paul Burnett on Radio 1 reading out a request for me.
Oh!
Although he got my name wrong, which is slightly annoying. But
what did he call you?
He called me Simon Mays, I think. He had a feature called Fun at 1, where he basically played a comedy record at 1 o'clock. That was the feature.
Yeah.
What was the record?
The song was The Great Bell Song by Marty Feldman, which I think, which is very funny, but it's safe to say wouldn't ever get on the air anymore.
And did you request it?
I did, yes.
So you were really excited. It was like, oh, it's my request. Oh, you said my name wrong.
Right, he got my name wrong. Anyway, I told Paul that anyway, so it's all fine.
So if you have a request yourself for a vintage confession, we just need the details, as many as you can, including when we first read it out, to confessions@bbc.co.uk, and we'll do our very best to dig them out from the crypt.
So regular listeners will know that before we sign off, we ask you to tweet us a special code phrase to prove you've listened all the way to the bitter end, which is what this is. So thanks to Dr. Cat and John and Uma and Graham and Neris and Ed and everyone who tweeted, I wish I had a wire in my bra, which kind of makes no sense unless you heard confessions from last week. This week's code phrase is, I'll be shark, you be banana. That works.
I can't wait. And that's it for this week. If you have anything that you'd like to get off your chest, we are all ears. We'd love to hear from you. Please send in your confession to confessions@bbc.co.uk.
If you haven't already done so, don't forget to subscribe to the Confessions podcast. Remember, you can hear our show 5 o'clock weekdays, Monday to Friday, BBC Radio 2. Although we are both going on holiday.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah. That's right. Not together. Well, actually, Joe thinks it's not together, but I think I'm just going to turn up.
If you're there in my bedroom when I get there, Disco Steve will not be happy.
This is so
Disco
wrong,
Steve is going to be perfectly fine with it. I arranged it with him. Anyway, until then, thank you, Joe. Thank you, Bobby.
Cheers. Thanks, Simon.
She taught me to yodel, yodel-a-dee, yodel-a-dee, yodel-a-dee.
The Confessions Podcast. Go in peace.